Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. In today's episode, we're joined by the Mirror's Simon Bird for an episode we're simply titling The View from the Nationals. We always like to bring different opinions and voices. And if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you'll know Simon isn't one to hold back, and there is plenty to discuss, starting with Newcastle missing out on Europe, what that means for Eddie Howe and the club's transfer plans, as well as looking at the impact of that trip to Australia. Do hit like, subscribe, follow, and give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. And if you haven't already and are listening on the audio channel, please leave a rating and review. It's all very much appreciated. Let's get on with the show. Simon, welcome back to the podcast. You well?
Thank you very much. Very well, thank you. Yeah, enjoying it. Well, looking forward to the summer anyway. A few weeks without much football happening.
I'm going to say the season has seemed to last a lifetime, hasn't it?
Yeah, it started, end of June last year, pre-season started. Then we went to America in July, three cities through July, and then Champions League. By October, November, it seemed to have already seen a lot of football, and everything was, there's a different picture or a different feel around the place at that point. It's so optimistic and reaching a kind of a peak with the PSG game, etc. So, yeah, it went on a long time, and I think probably the players are glad of a rest as well, apart from the guys who are going to the Euros.
Plenty of great trips that you went on last season. We were in Dortmund, weren't we?
Yeah.
You're slightly disappointed that you'll not be going to some far-flung destination in Europe?
Yeah, absolutely gutted. I mean, one of my colleagues said a few months ago, you're all thinking with your passports, but yes, we are, because part of the job is having adventures, and part of the adventure is watching Newcastle in strange places, obscure places, capital cities, different continents, and that is like a massive perk of our job, and it's absolutely a massive perk of being a Newcastle fan if they get to Europe and travel. So yeah, definitely good they're not there.
Had you eyed a destination up? I was quite fancying Cyprus.
Cyprus would have been good. Yeah, I was looking for some like obscure northern European, Finland, kind of Copenhagen, that kind of area, and then maybe a bit of warmth by November or December. But it's those dreams have all come to nothing, and it's so disappointing. I mean, I had to do a double take when I switched on it just after half time of that match, Man City, Man U, and I just couldn't believe the score. So I thought that's typical.
Yeah, I'd been in Corbridge that afternoon. We were just driving back, and I just turned the radio on, and Man United had just got their second, and my wife was like, "What are you doing, Newcastle? I'm playing today," and I was like, I'm not even going to bother getting into it, what this means for next season. But let's start with that, because I want to start with a question. Obviously, Newcastle finished 7th, and I'm intrigued to know if your verdict on the season has changed following Man United's FA Cup win. So was 7th only a good finish if Newcastle got into Europe?
I think you can call the league finish a decent season, but not a successful one, because this time last year, Eddie Howe and the players weren't really talking about Europe, and they kind of banned it, and no one was allowed to say Europe was the target. This season, they openly said for weeks that, yeah, we want to get back there. The club needs to be there. That's the target. They want the bigger competition, Europa League, rather than the conference. And it looked like it was all after the turnaround following the FA Cup defeat at Man City in March and the reset in Dubai. It looked like it was going to happen. Lovely run of form, some banging the goals in, getting the wins. And then that last week just killed them, basically. So, yeah, it's a big hit to the club, I think. That's what they wanted to do. So, is it a success this season? I think I think 7th place I would call par for the course, because I think at the start of the season, with the extra European games and the cups and the squad size and kind of overachieving last year, you would say 7th usually gets you into Europe. If you're anywhere near the top 6, it's probably a decent finish. 7th is par for the course. 6th would have been excellent. 5th and 4th would have been just amazing. So it's been a decent season, but because that Man U win has taken they're in 8th and they haven't finished where they usually finish. They've kind of been robbed by circumstances, really, of a European place.
I think it's only the second time in 10 years that 7th place hasn't got Europe, which shows you what usually happens. And of course, Man City losing that final, I think it's the first one Pep Guardiola's lost in his time at the club. It seems very much Newcastle United's luck, doesn't it, that would happen, because everyone was betting on Man City to clinch victory against a very average Manchester United side. But I am of the viewpoint, Simon, that with 3 games to go, it was in Newcastle United's hands to qualify for Europe. So Newcastle really shouldn't have had to rely on anyone to clinch European football. What's your point on that?
No, I mean the looseness in that Man United game when they lost, if they just hadn't lost to Man U, just got another point. I mean, I have to say Chelsea put together a very good run. They looked dead and buried. They could have finished like bottom half come March, but they had a very good run. Pochettino got it together, so they've actually come good. So that's kind of half of the reason anyway. He didn't see that coming. So yeah, I just think it's so disappointing. It's deflated everyone. I think it's left a bit of not a sour taste, because with the injury problems and the revival that they did and the good start to the season, big dip in the middle of the season, I think people would have taken 7th and thought that was a success, and then taken the Europa Conference League on the chin and done it with seriousness. But to not have it leaves a kind of a bleak picture, I think, heading into next season. There's not those European adventures, and there's not that extra trophy to win, because I mean West Ham won it like this time last year. So Newcastle could have won that trophy. It's another chance. Another chance now gone.
Most certainly. I think you look back on the Brighton performance at home, the 1-1, as you mentioned, the Manchester United game as well. But you go back a few weeks before the Everton game, for example. There's so many results and performance where you just think if Newcastle had played to their full ability, we wouldn't even be sitting here having this conversation about them missing out, because they'd be in Europe, and they could even be a lot closer to actually Aston Villa in 4th, because they're only 8 points off them in the end.
Yeah, 60 points in the end was a decent haul from where they were back in March. So yeah, I mean, but I think that's one of the things that Eddie Howe look at this year, and the inconsistencies and the conceding the goals and how easy they were to open up. I think that's one of the things that he likes control. Just like Pep Guardiola likes control, is control of the ball, control of games. And Newcastle at times this season were a bit erratic and were pulled apart a little bit too much. Now, tactically, I think Eddie Howe's going to study that in the summer, come up with reasons and drill the team over the summer to try and address that. Because that was the biggest weakness. I mean, there was on the positive side, it was a fantastic season for goals scored, fantastic home record, which is brilliant. The two things that need addressing are the away record and the kind of looseness in defence and the goals conceded. So they're the two, I mean, glaring things. There were positives if they can keep the goals record going, and it was an unprecedented year for the goals scored in the Premier League. Goals per game average was right up the record. So yeah, there are things to work on, but there's always going to be things to work on 2.5 years into a kind of relaunch.
But the defence is a massive issue, and I think if you couple that with the midfield as well, which is just getting overrun consistently. I know they haven't had Joe Linton for a large part of the season, but I still think there were elements, even when Joe Linton was there, where you saw the midfield just getting bypassed time and time again. Eddie Howe has 20th of May now, so has just over 2-3 months to work on fixing those issues, big issues. What is the remedy? Is it a sum of work? Is it a full squad? Is it additions? Is it a little bit of all three?
It's probably a bit of all three. It's probably getting everyone fit. So Botman was exceptional, unbeatable last season. Struggled early on with an injury, played on with an injury, didn't have the operation, and his fitness worries have kind of transmitted into the team. You might need to, and then there was kind of problems at left back with Joe Linton not locking down the left side with Willock and Dan Burn, which was a brilliant trio of down the left. Which, I mean, Newcastle didn't give anything away down the left during that season with those three working so hard. But they lost Willock and Joe Linton. Therefore, you've got the protection for Dan Burn gone, and he got exposed. So that needs to be shored up. I think you might want to. Kieran Trippier's had his injury problems as well. Now, I mean, he got 10 assists and still had a decent season, but it was chop and change all the time. There was different defenses, different combinations. I think you might need to add a bit of athleticism into the defence, which is why they're going for the targets they're going for. A bit of youth and just to freshen it up a little bit. And I don't think they've kind of solved that left back problem yet, even though Lewis Hall's kind of probably going to be made permanent. So there's and obviously Bruno's doing two jobs. He's like shielding at the back and kind of trying to protect the defence, but he's also trying to be the playmaker. You maybe need a partner for him who can lock things down and gain control of the ball a bit better in front of the defence. So, yeah.
And we'll get on to transfers in a moment because there's plenty to talk about what they need, what they're going after, who also might leave. But just going back to missing out on Europe, and I just want to get your point on that Manchester United game, just ever so briefly, because there's no point going over it in too much detail. But do you think Eddie Howe made a mistake in not playing Nick Pope and Joe Linton in that game, given there was only one game after that, and given the importance of picking up 3 points at Old Trafford?
Well, the thing is, Eddie Howe sees them in training and he sees how fit they are, and they were both coming back from fitness. I think it's kind of harsh. You have to be ruthless, and I think there would always come a time where you put Pope back in. That probably did come a bit too late. On the Joe Linton front, I'm not sure, because he'll have seen how physically fit Joe Linton was and whether he was ready. And they see them in training every day, so you've got to trust like the 6 coaches who are watching the whole thing happen in training. But the Pope thing, I think if he was fit to play 4 days later, he was almost certainly fit to play in goal at that point. So I might have put Pope in, and that might be a regret.
And it's interesting as well, because we talk about the defensive issues, and one of the remedies is getting your number one goalkeeper back in Nick Pope. But one of the questions I'm going to ask you later is actually about goalkeepers, because Newcastle have been linked to 3 or 4 this summer. But on, again, missing out on Europe, does it add pressure to Eddie Howe? I'm not saying he's under pressure now. I think that might come later. Say the first 10 games, he has a bad start to the season. But there will be a little bit of pressure if the season doesn't start correctly.
I think there definitely is, because the feeling on social media and the feeling amongst fans in the last few days seems to have been, well, the one advantage of not being in Europe is where Newcastle are going to attack the league now. And I've seen a lot of people saying back in the top 4, and that is like kind of a massive expectation. I think it's an unrealistic one. I think top 6 is once again would be a great benchmark for next season, even without Europe. So, but people are talking about top 4. Eddie Howe has spoken himself about how he feels better having a week's preparation with his team. I think it also means that they might actually need a smaller squad, or not a smaller squad, but they might not need the numbers in their squad, but they need better quality, because if you're not in Europe, you can absolutely attack every round of the Carabao Cup. There's no messing around. You can play your first team or just tweak it in the Carabao Cup, so there's no mistakes. And same with the FA Cup. Like, don't whinge about the FA Cup coming in January and replays and all that stuff. When you're not in Europe, you can just go for it with pretty much your best team. Now, there's players who will benefit from that, and there are fringy players who are trying to make their name, like, I don't know, Anderson, maybe Willock if he's on the comeback, Lewis Miley, who might suffer, because Eddie Howe, there's an opportunity now to play fewer games and really attack them all. So, but there will be pressure on Howe next year. It'll be interesting to see what this year's Premier League fixture computer throws up for them in the first 10 games. Now, usually when Newcastle under the caution, there's a bit of pressure. It stacks up a load of really difficult games at the start of the season, just to see what's happening at Newcastle, and Sky get the benefit from that, and everyone's interested in. So it'll be interesting to see what games they get early on. But it does. I mean, I think they've got to start well. If they don't start well, and it's a long haul this season, isn't it? I mean, they need to win games early, and they need to hit the ground running like they did this year.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed they can do that. Obviously, they started the campaign with a fantastic win over Aston Villa, didn't they? Then I think they lost the next 3 and picked up a win or 2 after that. But we'll get on to the futures of Bruno Guimaraes and Alexander Isak, because it's all everyone's talking about. And it's probably the biggest worry for fans, especially those 2 players, because they're Newcastle's key players. We'll start with Bruno. What do you understand about his future here at Newcastle? Do you think he's going to be a Newcastle United player next season?
Well, I think publicly he shows all the right loyalty, all the right commitment. He's been an absolute superstar this year. I did a thing in the Mirror this week on the player ratings for the season, and I gave him 9.5 out of 10. He's always been available. The remarkable thing about Bruno is he's always fit. He's played more minutes than anyone in the Premier League. I think the stat is 400 and something odd, nearly 500 minutes. So basically, Bruno, I think everyone wants him to stay, but he's the kind of player that, like Pep Guardiola, they could fit into the Man City side if they lose Bernardo Silva, for instance, and they would pay 80 odd million for him. Same with Arteta. He's the kind of player who, with Odegaard, could really work some magic in midfield. The problem, I think he would stay at Newcastle and be part of the building, but as soon as you have, if there is a team like that in for him, who are paying 300 grand a week. I mean, these figures sound ridiculous, but we know Man U, Arsenal, teams like that, Man City pay 300 grand a week. And Newcastle aren't anywhere near that. Bruno, I don't know what he's on, 150 to 200 new contract maybe. Don't think anyone's over 200 grand a week at Newcastle. So if you can double your wage from 150 grand a week to 300 grand a week, and it's a 5-year deal, that's 40 million pounds more you're going to earn. So I think in the end, what we're talking, it's money will talk. So it's not about his loyalty to Newcastle. I'm sure he loves Newcastle, the fans, the stardom he's got here, the way his family are treated, and the project he's doing with Eddie Howe has made him a better player. But if someone says, of Arsenal or Man City, say, here's a load of money, double what you're earning now, the player will go because you get 5 years more to earn, you to set yourself up for life.
And you go to a club that is...
And you go to a club that's challenging, who can win stuff, who are in the Champions League, because he's a Champions League player and so is Isak. And I think that's what it boils down to. If someone's coming and saying, here's a double your wages scenario, they'll do it. Now, everyone says that it's clever that they put this £100 million clause in for June, which ends on June the 30th. Well, that just delays a bid. I think, you could trigger it, but you could actually... Bruno goes on the open market on the 30th of June and someone could come in with 80 million. If you want to get him early, you've got to pay 100, but you could just let it run and tempt him behind the scenes with the money.
I guess the club are hoping that Bruno won't push for a move. No one meets that £100 million clause, and the club does come in with, say, 75, 80 million pounds. And the hope is that, if he does, then a bit more could potentially start. But it's interesting you mentioned there the loyalty to the club, because I think that's what everyone's hedging their bets on, that he's not going to get this love and admiration anywhere else, whether it be a move to Manchester United, Man City, Arsenal, Real Madrid. Here at Newcastle, he's already a legend. He's already a hero. You'll not get that at any other club. You've covered Newcastle United for a long time. Do those kind of viewpoints really stand up to reality?
Anyone having that debate, all the fans having that debate, I would say put yourself in the players' shoes and don't blame them if they choose to move or they agitate to move, because if you're sitting there, put it in your own job situation, love or loyalty to who you're working for now because you love the team you're in and the lads you work with, lads or lasses you're working with, or £40 million more over the next 5 years. You're gonna go for the money. It's like a harsh, horrible thing, especially if it's loads more money and it's life changing and it sets you up for life.
And I look at the Declan Rice situation at West Ham. He was. It was his club. He was captain. He just won the Europa Conference League with them, and then he went off to Arsenal, 105 million. And you look at the situation there. He had more reason than most to stop at West Ham. It was his club, but he wanted to go and challenge at a top club. And then you look at what West Ham did with the money. They really reinvested it really well. I mean, Kudus is an absolutely fantastic player, to name one that they brought in. So it does show as difficult and as heartbreaking it is to lose your key player in the middle, because they have suffered. David Moyes made that very clear. He was asked, why is the season tailed off? Because we haven't got Declan Rice. Eddie Howe might say a similar thing next year. Indeed, did you lose Bruno? But it shows that you can reinvest the money wisely and build a better squad.
Yeah, and I think at the minute, the best scenario Newcastle can have in the transfer window is to keep those two, Isak and Bruno. And that's what everyone wants. We don't want to not be covering Bruno and Isak next year as journalists. They're absolutely dynamite to cover. They're brilliant characters and brilliant footballers. The best transfer window Newcastle have is to hold on to those two, maybe add one or two pricey players, 30 million, 50 million, and then see what you can do cleverly otherwise, and sell others that we'll get into it later. But there's probably four saleable assets there who raise a decent amount of money. But I think Newcastle will probably have various transfer scenarios they're working on. Eddie Howe has hinted at this in his press conference that there's a lot of balls in the air. They don't know what's going to happen, and they've got to react when stuff happens. And I think that's what he meant if someone tables the money for those two. But I also must make the point that I think the current owners will be actually really awkward sellers when it comes to the stars, because it's a big loss of face or loss of prestige if you lose one of those two. And I think that's why we heard talk of Isak's price being 200 million this year, just to put people off for another year, park it, see what they can do with them next year. I don't think they want to sell those two at all. But if a player agitates and the money's almost there on the table, it would be decent money, they might have to sell.
Less likely that Isak leaves this summer, do you think?
I think it's the other way around.
Do you?
I think the gold dust is the centre forward, the star centre forward. 25 goals this year, 21 in the league. We've not seen those stats since Alan Shearer in 2004 when he got those figures. And I think the really, really rare player is Isak. And that there's its movement. He can play across the line. He can come from deep, and he scores goals and he finishes. And he's so cool when he finishes. And there's not many of those around in world football that are as dynamite as Alexander Isak. I think he's the one that globally it would attract interest.
Is £200 million then a fair price to ask, do you think?
Yeah, I think you'd hold out for that, and then see if you can get a world record fee for him if he's going to be sold. And there's, I mean, the thing is, Real Madrid are probably going to spend the money on Mbappe. Barcelona haven't got an awful lot of money, so that, and the Italians haven't. So that kind of the abroad marketplace is kind of shrunk a little bit, and which is in Newcastle's favour. So that's not going to hike the price. It's whether Man City, if they lost Haaland, somehow Arsenal they've got a gaping hole in their squad. Arsenal for a centre forward who scores goals and is mobile and quick and could fit that style, and Isak could fit that style. Sadly, so they need to really screw Arsenal if they come in and start tempting.
But there is a little bit of talk, isn't there? Alexander Isak could potentially get a new deal, which might protect Newcastle somewhat, at least in terms of the value, because obviously we all like to think a new 5-year deal, whatever, keeps the player here for 5 years, but it's never usually the case.
Yeah.
But it does protect their value or their ability to ask for more.
Yeah, and also the player, if an offer comes in for him, or he hears that the club are valuing him 200 million, his agent's gonna knock on the door and say, "Well, pay me like a 200 million pound player, please." Yeah. So if that's the briefing from Newcastle, you're a 200 million pound player. Isak says, "I'll have 200 grand a week, 250 grand a week."
But I guess, and we've mentioned this before, but the deal with Joe Linton to get him a new deal, he's had a pay rise, and he wanted whatever the club have negotiated, etc. They've obviously sold him something as well in terms of this is what we can do here. And I suspect one of the questions he was asked, well, what about if we miss out on European football? So they've got to hope whatever they sold him works with Bruno and Isak. If they're knocking on the door and saying, oh, I'm thinking about wanting to go to XYZ, they can hopefully sell the same sales pitch to them as they did to Joe Linton.
Yeah, and I think there probably will have to be a sales pitch and Eddie Howe's doing that with his players all the time to get the best out of them and sell them a dream, and this is like what your target is, and that's all part of Howe's psychology. And it was interesting, the last game of the season, and Howe kind of knocked this in the next press conference, but after the last home game, they all walked around, and Yasser Al-Rumayyan was on the pitch, and he glad-handed everyone very briefly. But the person he made a beeline for was Isak, and after that, Isak's family, and he did a real charm job. He talked to him for quite a lot, and there was a bit of this, and he was really getting into him. Was Yasser Al-Rumayyan, and we don't know what the message was, but I mean, I think we can guess that it was like, I love you, and if any problems, I want you to come to me, and you will sort it out. And I think that was a big bridge builder from the actual chairman of the club, which is unusual to see on the pitch.
Shows you the importance of Isak, doesn't it? And we've said it, what a player he is. Just briefly on Bruno, because one of the things that might impact Bruno's future at Newcastle and a potential move to Man City. I mean, Pep Guardiola has made no bones about it. He's a big fan of Bruno. Bigger fan, you would think, of his fellow countryman in Bezi Mara, Paqueta, but Paqueta potentially is facing a very lengthy ban if these charges that have been laid at his door, which he denies, but the FA have charged him with various betting infringements. He is facing a lengthy ban if proved to be guilty of them, and that then could lead Man City to turn elsewhere and go after Bruno.
I don't think anyone's going to touch Paqueta at the minute. He's got that ban looming. The stories from colleagues in London were that it could be years. I mean, like, people were talking like a 10-year ban. It's so serious, the charges Paqueta is facing. So he's off the radar. It's terrible for West Ham when they've got a new manager. And I read a rosy write-up about what he's inheriting from Moyes, but they've got a player who was worth 85 million 2 weeks ago, and now he's probably worth nothing. So they've got big problems with Paqueta, and he's off the radar for everyone, even though he's a brilliant player.
Which is maybe bad news for Newcastle when it comes to City looking to get a new midfielder. But go on, I'm going to push you. Start of the season, both in black and white, Isak and Bruno?
Yes, because I think Newcastle will play hardball with anyone who tries to buy them.
End of the transfer window still in black and white?
Well, that's a different matter. I think we could end up with one of those really tense last days, that knowing people are getting desperate, knowing, for instance, Arsenal want a striker. That really would kind of be the worst way to do it, because if you're going to sell someone and you want to do it in early July, and then have the money to invest.
But
They'll have deals lined up.
I guess so. This ownership has proven they're very different to what Mike Ashley would do, because you could see that scenario playing out under Mike Ashley. But here they seem to have a plan. They're not going to sell a key man like Isak or Bruno and not have a replacement for them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can see a last day drama. Simply, I think the rumours might be there, but I can't see Newcastle unless it is a crazy bit. But even then, because they will be then going 3, 4, 5 months without a key man in a key position. So
I think they might resist. I mean, I think it would be such a morale after missing out on Europe, finishing 7th, wanting this positive momentum that's been happening for 31 months now with the new regime and Howe in charge. I think it'd be such a blow. I think it would be an amazing statement by the owners if they could bat off interest from everyone and say, just give us another year and see where Newcastle is next summer.
Well, that's the point, though, wasn't it? I asked you about pressure on Eddie Howe in the first 10 games or so. I think there's an added pressure when you get to January because if Newcastle United are out of the top 6, or I know you said top 4 is a bit too much, but I do actually think they have to be in the conversation for top 4 come January if they've kept Bruno and Isak, because I think then you have a bit of a problem where you go, well, you told me we were going to be challenging for the top 4. We're 8th. We're 10 points off.
Yeah.
Do they then go knocking on the door and say, right, Man City are backing for me this month. I would like to go. So I do think there's an added little bit of pressure. I guess the sales pitch, as we've talked about, might be, as you said, we're going to give the Cups first team priority. We are going to be challenging for the Champions League this season, and we can do it. Look what happened the season prior when we didn't have European football. We can do that again.
Yeah, I think that's right. And but the pressure point, there will become a pressure. If they keep them both, then there's a pressure point in January if they're not doing well. If they're doing well and they're in the semi-final of the Carabao Cup, no player's going to walk away, I don't think, in January from the prospect of being part of the first team in decades. 60, 70, I've lost count how many decades it is now.
It's all rolling into one.
The Cup. No one's going to walk away from it being in the semi-final of the Carabao Cup and with the final happening in February and the chance to win a cup. So they've got to have a good start, resist those sales, have a good start, and then things can snowball from there, hopefully.
Do you think they will be a little bit good at missing out on the Europa Conference League? Because I think a lot of people on social media are saying it's one thing missing out on the Champions League, maybe the Europa League, but Isak and Bruno, they're not going to really be caring about the Conference League.
I don't think they care about the early stages, but then the thing is, you could, with the squad Newcastle hope to build, you could play Elliot Anderson in some obscure place in, I don't know, Georgia, Kazakhstan, wherever they were going to go, and you could play Willock's getting back fit, and you could really mix and match and blood that squad in the early rounds, and it would take the pressure off the A team, really. So I think it is really annoying that they're not going to get that opportunity.
I mean, I would have taken it without question, and you would, as we've both alluded to, because I think, okay, you're not going to earn a lot of money. I think my colleague Aaron Stokes did a podcast yesterday, and he talked about West Ham winning it and only earning, I think, 20 million or something from winning the actual competition, whereas the Champions League is obviously much more lucrative. But what the Conference League does do, it allows you to get used to playing the schedule of games, and we saw Newcastle maybe struggle a little bit with it last season in the Champions League. So from an on the pitch point of view, I think getting used to the schedule is really important. But also, it's not going to earn you a load of money, but it's still going to put you out there in front of the TV audiences, isn't it? And that's the key thing. They're trying to build a sponsorship, the brand. So yes, okay, monetary value, you're not really missing out, but there are other benefits where Newcastle are missing out.
Yeah, I mean, I think sponsorship wise, you have 38 games and a couple in the cup, each cup. That's like 42 games. If your team's then playing 55, 58 games and getting to the cup finals, then that's loads more sponsorship value for Seller and whoever else Amanda Staveley's talking to about new sponsors. It's branding in newspapers. So we could have had 15 more games in the Europa Conference League to cover. That's 15 press conferences where we're talking about Newcastle, 15 games, 15 follow-ups. That's 45 extra in the newspaper exposés of the Seller brand and anyone else who's attached to the shirt, Adidas. That's a lot of more exposure that you get in a national newspaper, on the telly, in the regionals, in everywhere. It's huge. I mean, it just adds value to the club being in Europe. Doesn't matter which competition it is.
And that's exactly why I think it is a big thing that they have missed out. And again, social media is not really something you want to measure the fan base's opinion by, but there's a lot of discussion on whether it is a bad thing they have missed out. But I think it really is. For where Newcastle United want to be on this journey of being an established top side, then any European competition is huge to help them get to where they want to be.
Yeah, and it's all like the whole, the research that's got to be done by this, all the backroom staff have got to get used to someone taking charge of one game, and then someone looking ahead to the weekend game and not concentrating on the midweek European game. And there's all that dovetailing and organisation of the staff and juggling of the squad. Maybe Steve McLaren, when we used to go with Borough, planned his squads 3-4 games in advance, and I'm sure Eddie Howe's coaches do that as well. There's all that travel arrangements last year when they turned up really late at night because of a storm in Milan, couldn't land, flight was delayed for hours, and they didn't go to on away games. They didn't train in the stadium the night before, so they were a bit, I don't know, like walking out in the San Siro going, God, this is amazing. Where Bobby's team, trained on the night before just to get the feel of it. So there's all kind of getting used to a system like that.
Because if you get used to it, they're the little advantages which could actually get you a win and get you progress in the competition.
Yeah, and you win a game knowing you felt bad and you didn't like the travel, and you think, oh, well, it doesn't matter, I'm feeling bad today, but we won last time, feeling like that. So there's all those different feelings, and the tiredness of getting back 3 a.m, 4 a.m, sometimes on the Alan Pardew trips in 2012 on the players' flight. All that stuff needs adjusting to, training the next day in the afternoon instead of the morning because you're all so tired. So it's just a great experience to be in Europe, and it's a great adjusting thing for this.
It's interesting you mentioned that the medical staff have not been maybe used to, again, the schedule that the players have had, and now they've got a season where they're not dealing with players who are playing 3 games in a week, and it will be difficult for them to go this season, and if they get into next season, to jump straight back into the seat that they had the season prior, and that is something that will be difficult to get your head around, and that's exactly why the Conference League would have been ideal, because it just helps them get used to it, and the players get used to it as well. So I think it is a massive thing they've missed out. Is it a massive thing they've missed out in terms of potential arrivals? Or their transfer plans going to change? Is the sales pitch going to change? We look at, Lloyd Kelly looks like it's pretty much done and dusted, but Tosin Adebayo from Fulham on a free. Chelsea, Manchester United have now jumped in.
Yeah,
is missing out on Europe. Yes, it's in the Conference League, but is that going to have an impact?
I don't think like being in the Europa League or the Conference League would change a player's mind about joining Newcastle. I think if you're in the Champions League, I think that opens up different players, a different level of player. Like they got Tonali last year. I think that was one of them because they were in the Champions League and Tonali considered it and came, unfortunately. So I do think, I don't think it makes any difference really in terms of who they're going to sign, because I think at the minute, without selling anyone, without cashing in on a star, I'm not sure if the budget's enormous. I mean, they seem to have this ceiling of about 50-60 million as the headline figure for a player. Eddie Howe said a month or so ago, before the end of the season, they can't sign ready-made elite players. So they are signing people like Lloyd Kelly, Tosin, others to make them better and add value and double the price. Like Anthony Gordon, 35-40 million. Now he's probably worth 60. So that's how they're signing. I think those players aren't going to turn Newcastle down just because they're not in Europe. I think they would look at a chance to join Newcastle as a massive step up.
With Tosin, do you think there is a risk that Chelsea, Manchester United are going to beat Newcastle to a signature? Because last week there was so much confidence that both Lloyd Kelly and Tosin would pretty much were done, and come the opening of the window, they'd be here. You'd see them with the scarves and the shirts on. But there was a real fear now that Tosin could end up at Chelsea or Manchester United.
I think he's, if Chelsea and Man U are in for him, then I think he's going to be getting more money out of Newcastle if he comes here than he did. But I think he needs to be careful making his choices, because Chelsea. Why did Chelsea need him? They've got how many? They've got a squad of. It's enormous squad, and they've got young centre backs, and they want him because he's an asset and he's free. And as soon as they put him on the books, he's worth 20-30 million, right? So Chelsea are signing him like a hedge fund manager. They want him. They want this asset for free, not necessarily to fit in the squad because they love him and they want to coach him and make him better. Now he's got to look at that and think, well, what's my career better off doing? Is it better off going to Chelsea, where I don't even know if I'm going to play, and I'm just treated as a massive lump of cash, or come to Newcastle and improve yourself and have a great platform to play in front of the crowd and really distinguish yourself. Man U, different matter. I mean, that's like a huge club. They might be able to pay more, but they haven't. Who's the manager? He doesn't know who the manager is. So the director of football's not even in there yet, Dan Asher. So he's going to have to make a careful choice. I think Newcastle's possibly the best choice for him. But
do you think as well, not just for Torsten, but for Newcastle as a whole, that kind of uncertainty around Chelsea, around Manchester United, that helps Newcastle in terms of what they can achieve next year? I know Chelsea have already finished above them, but everyone thought Poch would be staying. He's gone. So the new manager's going to have to come in. He was never managed an elite level. Yeah. He's going to have to get used to things, the big squad, the owner in his ear. Manchester United, is Ten Hag staying? Is he going? Newcastle have this, kind of arm of consistency, really. Is that a benefit to them going into next season?
It can be. I mean, depends how the squad takes to the new manager, and so there is a risk there. Obviously, you've changed. You got rid of Pochettino, who was getting into the players' heads and creating something, and now he's away. So it depends how they take to the new manager. Man U surely can't be any worse than last year. They're not going to finish worse than 8th, so they're going to be back on it. Whoever's if there's a new manager, I mean, Ten Hag might be chaos still. Who knows? So. Yeah, there is. Newcastle have got stability, but I mean, we've seen in the past how clubs change managers and they get a spark out of it. So you just don't know. Stability might be a good thing, or people might change managers and get an extra spark and a jump out of changing managers. It's a gamble. Chelsea will always be roundabout because the amount of money they're throwing at it. Some players will come good, and a team will emerge eventually, whether it's by accident or serious planning or coaching, we don't know.
Which I guess rolls into the added frustration of what happened in the season just gone, that Newcastle haven't finished above a very poor Manchester United side and a Chelsea side who are always struggling to find the best 11. Yes, Newcastle have had injuries, so etc. But it is a little bit of a frustration. We've got a few questions, Simon, that came in via social media. Simon says, what sort of budget will there be for incomings if we don't sell Bruno or Isak?
Eddie Howe said the other week that there's no such thing as a budget these days. So whatever that meant, I think it's a transfer window to be reactive, to get 2 or 3 in early. And then if you can sell the likes of, I mean, Wilson might be up for sale, probably will be moving on. Almiron, probably, if they can sell him. Trippier, will he be here? There seems to be some doubt about it this week about whether Trippier is going to still be around. So it depends if you can sell early and raise money and then react and have a target. And they'll have targets, a list of targets in every position, researched and ready to go and knowing where to go and how to buy them. It just depends. The big mystery is can they afford, and who will be their big signing? Who's the marquee one this year, like Tonali was last year? So without selling, have they got 60 million plus bits and bobs of selling? Have they got that to go this year? I don't know.
Well, let's talk about departures, because I have got those names that you've just mentioned there written down at the top of my list. We'll start with Kieran Trippier. Obviously, interest from Bayern Munich in January. Newcastle made it clear that they were not up for selling. He stayed. He's picked up injuries. When he has played, he hasn't looked himself. He's probably going to go to the Euros with England. But I could see him going in the summer if a bid of a similar amount came in. I think they'd be lucky to get a similar bid from any team,
10,
really.
15, right?
Yeah, but I reckon a 10, 12 million pound bid, you could see him going, because, and I said this to you back in August when you won the podcast, and you had a little chuckle at us, but I did say Tino Livramento will be first choice right back, and I'm dining out on that because I still think he will be.
Yeah.
And I can't see how Eddie Howe could play Kieran Trippier ahead of him, if Livramento was fit, and given the season, or the end of the season minus the injuries that Livramento had, I think he will be first choice. And will Kieran Trippier be happy to sit on the bench and collect his paycheck, or will he want to have one last go at first team football somewhere else?
Yeah, he might want another adventure. I mean, he's been all over the place. He's had a great career, Trippier. He's really good with us. He always speaks his mind. He stops, and he's very respectful. We are of everything he's achieved. He could be a bit of a wild card that could fancy a new challenge somewhere else. He might want to be in Europe. Might want to further his career abroad. Harry Kane, Bayern Munich, and his mates are over there. That'll be an amazing adventure to have. We don't know if that's going to happen, but we might have seen. The question Eddie Howe must ask is, have we seen peak Kieran Trippier in Newcastle, and has he got a ready-made replacement?
And I think
those two things possibly are true.
What you mentioned there about him being honest and coming out to speak, and he's always up front. Kieran Trippier would be the first to kind of hold his hands up and say, maybe my time in the Premier League is done. Have I lost a yard of pace? Because his way of defending, you still have to have the legs, and if that has gone, a bit like Kevin Keegan when he retired from Newcastle. He knew his legs had gone. He said, right, that's me done. So maybe Kieran Trippier will be the first to say, I'm going to go somewhere where maybe I don't have to be as quick.
Yeah, that's possible. Although you're not saying that before he plays in the Euros. So
no, well, that's true.
He's away with England, and he's probably going to be their left back if Luke Shaw's not fit. So
is Lewis Hall unlucky not to get a shout there?
Lewis Hall,
left back,
he's nowhere near the England team.
Well, they've got no left backs though.
He's nowhere near the England team. You can't. Lewis Hall looks really promising going forward. He looks like actually a midfielder when he goes forward and tucks inside and does some very clever passes. Defensively and chasing back, he's got so much to learn. I mean, it's everything. Brentford targeted it. Brentford really went for that left side over the top, breaking. He's going to be good. He's only 18, so don't condemn him automatically. But as a left back, he's got a lot to learn defensively, and that included when he played at Dortmund, when people were getting crosses in, that every cross came in instead of him blocking it.
He came off at half time, didn't he?
So yeah.
Miguel Almiron, now his agent, came out last week and said there's interest from other Premier League clubs, but Newcastle don't want to sell. He doesn't look like he wants to leave. He's a man that always divides opinion. I don't think he had the greatest end to the season. I think a lot of people a little bit angry that the way he fell to the floor against Brighton. That angered me. That forced me to close the fan club down because I was that angry at it. Will he still be a Newcastle player come the end of the transfer window, do you think?
I mean, if you want to cash in and get a quick 20 million in, I think he'd be right at the top of the list. I think we've seen his peak a couple of years ago. I think he got 1 assist and 3 goals this year. Stats aren't great for this campaign. I mean, he's been fun. He smiles lots, doesn't he? But I think he's the one. He's top of the list for an asset, a low key asset to sell.
I mean, Ipswich have been linked, which would be an interesting move, wouldn't it? Callum Wilson is the other one. Again, someone is just massively frustrating because I think we've both said it on previous podcasts. A fit Callum Wilson, there's not many better strikers in the Premier League than him, but we don't see it often enough. I don't think Newcastle can gamble going into the season with just Isak and Wilson. I said you keep Wilson, but following the end of the season, I'm not too sure anymore.
Yeah, when he came back, got back and scored, and then Burnley, then optimistic about his future. I actually asked him about his future after the Burnley game when he came through the mix zone, and he said, "Yeah, well, I'll be at pre-season," and it wasn't like, "Well, no, I've got another year of my contract." He said, "I'll be here for pre-season." So, okay, well, what about after that? And he went, "Yeah," and went off. So there's not a definitive answer about Callum Wilson, but it could well be the club are looking at their assets like they do, not Eddie Howe, but the club, and saying he's got a year left. We should really be selling him for 10 million.
How much does he? I was going to say, how much does he fetch, and who buys him? Because me and Aaron had this debate a few weeks ago about potential buyers of Callum Wilson. I said, well, it's not going to be a team that needs who's fighting against relegation, because if you're spending 10 million, that's probably a large chunk of your budget on a striker who you cannot guarantee plays more than 20 games a season. Okay, you get to 10 goals. Is that going to keep you in the Premier League?
Brentford were linked with him this week, weren't they?
To replace Tony, though, I know Tony's missed,
they get loads of money for Tony, so they will certainly afford 15 million, 20 million for Callum Wilson.
But again, you're risking that game time, right? And then that's exactly the reason Newcastle are selling, because you can't guarantee he's fit.
Yeah, that's the problem with Wilson. If he goes somewhere or he stays, he needs to prove he can stay fit, and at the moment he can't. And that's just his body. That's not his fault. It's not his attitude. I don't think it's just his body and the way the athlete that he is.
Could Newcastle keep him, manage him really well, and try and make sure he only plays a certain amount of games, and then they go out and buy another striker to?
I mean, if they keep him next year, he probably gets 10 goals, and to replace him with a striker who will guarantee you 10, 12 goals if he plays, it's very expensive. It's probably more expensive than keeping him.
If he stops, do they then go after a youngster? Someone from the Championship maybe, or what do they do if he stops, and what kind of striker profile?
Do they say we have a mobile strike force and we can then use Anthony Gordon as a striker?
They can't. I'm sorry, Anthony Gordon. Yeah, I mean, they can do that, but
they can, but
he's not. He's not a striker. He's when he's moved to that centre, he's so less effective. He's best out on the flank.
He's out coming in.
And I think Newcastle United the need to make sure that's where he plays the majority of his games. And I think keeping just Callum Wilson and Isak's a massive gamble. And I think regardless of what happens, another strike has to come in.
The kind of need a pack full of potential 21-year-olds. Ideally, that would come out your academy, or you'd already have them in the ranks loaned out. Maybe they have. But you'll be looking for a 21-year-old who can emerge and become a play 20 games, come on as a sub for a bit, get some goals, confidence.
On the brief cameos we saw of QL in Australia, it's probably not going to be him.
No.
What about Mintz? I know he's more of a winger, but a fantastic season eventually over in Holland. What does the future hold for him? Is he going to go back out on loan, do you think, or will Eddie Howe take a proper look at him?
I think they'll have to look at him in unless they're going to sell him and
linked to Everton, wasn't he?
Now and get the money and say, well, he's not really going to be for us because we've got loads of wingers. That's an option, a big option. But Howe will probably want to have a look at him in pre-season and see if he can really hit the. Some players come back from pre-season and absolutely hit the ground running and really catch a manager's eye. And there's always that opportunity for him in July, I hope.
Paul Dummett, Matt Ritchie now talk that they would be staying had Newcastle got into Europe. Eddie Howe didn't play them in Australia, which raised a few eyebrows. And he said, well, they're out of contract. It would have been unfair. They got injured, etc., etc. Now Newcastle aren't in Europe. Is it the end of Dummett and Ritchie?
Probably, yeah. You don't need the homegrown English lads in your squad to bolster it and beef it out. The reduced number of games next year, and I think, well, potentially reduced number of games. If they go long in the cups, then it won't be, but they'll still be playing 50 odd. But I think with a better injury record, you don't need Matt Ritchie and Dummett on the bench, even though they've obviously been great pros and they've really helped Eddie Howe behind the scenes, and they've G'd people up and they've got in people's ears, and like that's an unseen role which we haven't witnessed, but I'm sure they've played an important role like that, especially Dummett. And you need links to local lads in there to explain why the crowd are reacting like they are and the mood of the place, and this is what happens. But they're probably on the way, I would have thought.
In terms of a goalkeeper, we mentioned it before, the remedy to fixing the leaky defence is probably getting your number one back, i.e. Nick Pope. But they have been linked to quite the list of goalkeepers in recent weeks. Talks reportedly started for the Valencia goalkeeper. You've had Trafford from Burnley linked over the weekend, and of course Aaron Ramsdale, the link that never seems to die. What's going on with the goalkeeping department?
I think I can only explain that because Nicky Pope is your obvious number one, and he has a great record of clean sheets, and they concede far fewer goals, like less than one a game when he was in. So. But is he good enough with his feet? So do they want to advance that with a goalkeeper who's amazing at distribution as well as shot stopping? Maybe they do. Maybe that's a position or something they've identified to improve the team. But also, I think there was a hint that when Nicky Pope did his shoulder, once you've done it, and I think he's done it more than once now, I think it's prone to happening again and again, and unless it's really properly fixed. Now, hopefully it's properly fixed, and hope Pope will be fine for the rest of his career. But once you've had your shoulder dislocated, there's a weakness there, and if it happens again, then you need a top quality backup, or you need a new number one. So it's delicate.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the Valencia goalkeeper, you talk maybe 35.
Can you say his name?
That's why I'm just calling him his Valencia goalkeeper.
The lad from Spain.
Because I mean, I've already had this joke. I'm terrible with names, so I'm not even going to attempt to do it. But he comes in. He's probably going to be the number one. You would argue Aaron Ramsdale comes in again. He's going to cost you the best part of 30 odd million. You can't see him coming to sit on the bench. Trafford maybe is a little bit different. You could come and see him being back up to Pope, but the dynamics are really different across the three that have been linked there.
Yeah, and it's like goalkeeper that problem position whereby a manager makes his choice and he's like basically meant to stick with it, and that's it. I've chosen my number one, and maybe you mix in with the cups. So, but then there was Arteta arguing earlier last season, wasn't he, when he dropped Ramsdale and brought Raya in, that no, I should be able to mix and match my goalkeeper like an outfield player, and anyone could slot in. So it would be interesting to have a bit of competition in that position. Dubravka's been really good during his time at Newcastle, but he's now not like the number one, and he's not a number two. I mean, they should move him on. He should go to Celtic, and he'd be brilliant up there. So they do need a new keeper. Whether you want to invest 30 million on a new keeper, that's a big chunk of your budget.
That's
when you've already got Pope. That's if they're in that business of like doing the calculations and where it's spent. It seems a lot of money to spend on it when you've got Nicky Pope there.
It certainly does. We talked briefly about it earlier in the show about the midfield, and again, bypassed and the jobs that Bruno is doing. Now, listeners to the podcast know I think number 6 is absolutely crucial. I thought it last summer. I thought it back in January. What's your viewpoint? Do they need a traditional number 6, or is it because the way Eddie Howe plays, it's a bit more fluid? It's not as easy just saying they need a number 6.
Yeah, I've heard double 6s and double 8s and stuff. People say, what are you on about? Like a holding midfielder.
Yeah, someone
like
old
language.
Polina from Fulham. Someone just sits there, protects the back four, gets at the ankles of the opponents, and then allows Bruno to go do what he's best at and go forward.
I think you need I think you need an athletic, enforcing midfielder, but they've also got to be good on the ball. And you've got to be athletic, because it's kind of a fluid thing where if Newcastle are a front foot team, then you've got the fullbacks pushed on, and you've got the two centre backs who are covering everything, like when last season when they were really on top of teams, and so you can't just have a leaden kind of strong man in there, because you've got Joe Linton who kind of could do that. You need a bit more energy and you need trickiness. And if Eddie Howe's evolving the team, a Rodri would be amazing. If you could get a Rodri who's brilliant on the ball and physical and shields and mops up and reads the play, that's the kind of the dream scenario.
We can only hope. Quick question from Lee, who says, where will Newcastle turn in the pursuit of a sporting director?
Maybe internally. If they've run out of candidates now, they've done this lengthy process and they haven't got anyone in, and they've been turned down by Dougie Freedman, then maybe you just say Andy Howe, who Eddie Howe is related to and works really closely with, doing a lot of research, and Nixon knowing with his contacts, knowing where to turn for the deals. Maybe you just let it run as it is with the recruitment staff they've got. Do you need someone linking all the departments, or does the chief exec do that? I don't know. I mean, there's a cult of the football exec at the minute, isn't there, where you need a technical director who everyone knows and thinks is has secrets and is a genius, and directors of football who link everything up in the department. I'm sure other people can dovetail and work around it.
Yeah, one to watch potentially. Australia, there was a lot of criticism about this trip to Australia, the quick turnaround. Especially the second game as well, playing a team of youngsters getting thrashed 8-0. What does that do for the brand? And then I think there was a report came over the weekend that they actually earned very little. Amanda Staveley, co-owner, came out and posted on Instagram. I'll just read the statement out and I'll get your viewpoint on it. I've seen a lot of comments about the Newcastle Australia trip, she said, which I'd like to address. Besides being a shareholder, I am first and foremost a fan. As a fan, I understand that this trip was controversial. However, personal opinions aside, revenue generating trips are crucial to a club's commercial success. The decision to go was taken by management, and ultimately I have to support their decisions. Nobody wants a fresh team ready for the season more than me, and we're doing everything we can to support our manager in achieving this. We are looking ahead to the new season. We are united. She also said, me and Dada and I have had a very productive working trip to Monaco with a potential sponsor. But I mean, she's come out and she's defended that trip, which did provoke quite a lot of.
She's defended it and blamed it on the people who work for her. Said it's the management's decision, and kind of absolved herself from flogging the players as a fan and saying that she probably wouldn't want them to go there. But that is the dilemma. Like Newcastle, right? So they've not qualified for the Champions League this year. So their European football income has gone from 40 million last season to nil. So the commercial department will point to that and say, right, well, we've got to raise some money from somewhere to plug the gap, the £40 million gap. So send them to Australia. Maybe they made it into an enjoyable trip. But it just seems like you get to the end of the season, everyone wants to switch off. You want to fly up from Brentford and be in Greece or wherever, Spain the next day within 2 days and just switching off.
Or Australia, but on the beach.
Australia, but on the beach in Sydney. But even Australia, the 24-hour flight, man. I mean, it's just far too much to put a team through. And we came back exhausted from Brentford and had my tea on Monday night. And then I was thinking about what was going on. I had a day in London at Kew Garden, afternoon at Kew Gardens in London. It was lovely. I thought, God, we watched them take off, having a pint on the river. And thought that must be their plane, about 9 o'clock, 9:30. There they go. And I think they're still in the air. It was like Monday night. I was thinking, they're still in the air now. That is going to exhaust them. And then they had to fly back. It was a daft trip, but it did raise some money. You can see both sides of the story. 8-0 was an embarrassment and not great for the brand. But I did laugh at the bit where it says, I'm doing everything. What does it say? I want to do everything to make the team fresh and ready for next season.
Yes, and we're doing everything we can to support the manager by
Yeah, so send them to Japan less than 2 weeks before the season starts. That's halfway around the world to play 2 games.
But hopefully, I mean, maybe some of them, the players will be already kind of over that way, so that's maybe the flights aren't going to be as long haul.
Less than 2 weeks. I mean,
but this is the issue that
12 hours.
You've made a good
14
point,
hours?
haven't you, about the revenue, because Newcastle's so far behind other teams, and they've done really well to get it up and start growing it. That's got to be continued. It's going to be harder with them not being in Europe. So these trips are really crucial to the long-term success of Newcastle
and the brand. I mean, the Far East is a massive brand. If Newcastle get established, I mean, I am playing devil's advocate a bit there, because I think they have got to do an exotic. Everyone does an exotic pre-season tour, and I think they need those to build the brand and build connections. And I wonder if they'll sign a Japanese player to go along with that pitch. We should do a bit of research whether a Japanese player could, because that would really ignite the. I mean, you don't just sign players for the pitch, but you also sign them commercially as well. And I wonder if they will look at a Japanese player in international and see.
Well, some good ones. As Anne showed at Celtic, there's some very talented Japanese players out there. Just finally, then, before I let you get off, Adidas returning. The temporary store opens on the 29th, which is tomorrow. The new strip isn't out until the 7th of June. But it's very exciting, isn't it? And it kind of sets the bar for other commercial deals to come down the line, isn't it? Because Adidas is the one.
Adidas is amazing. Although the trainers are too narrow for me, so I'm a bit disappointed about that. But but the Adidas strips, and traditionally the Newcastle Adidas strips are amazing. And I think like a strip launch in June, when everyone's had a rest from the end of the season and then starts looking ahead, it does get excited. You do get excited for that first day of the season where everyone's wearing their new strips and it's just black and white all around St James's Park, and everyone's bought that Adidas strip, and it's like the old days of Keegan, and there's some great old strips of Adidas. So yeah, it is exciting. It should add loads of more money to the club, or be a boost anyway, a huge boost. And if we can see Adidas HQ at a pre-season training camp, that would also be amazing.
It'd be wonderful.
Make up for our lack of European trips next year.
Well, hopefully that can happen. Simon, thank you very much as always for popping on to the podcast. You guys watching, give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. If you listen on the audio channel, thank you as always. Leave us a rating and review. Share the pod amongst your Newcastle United supporting friends and family. And head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news.